Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something I think pretty fascinating, and that's this idea of the curse of high IQ.
Oh, yeah.
So this idea that sometimes, having a really high intelligence can actually be more of a burden than a blessing.
Yeah, it's kind of a head scratcher, right? Like you think that intelligence would just be universally celebrated. But the reality is that when you have a high IQ, navigating a world that's designed for the quote unquote average person can actually pose some unique challenges.
Yeah, and that's why we are looking today at Othniel Max Dave's book, Discarded Intellects of Bellcurvia. And what's so cool about this book is that it's not just, a straightforward sociological analysis of this topic. It's actually a fictional story interwoven with sociological analysis.
Yeah, it's a really clever way to approach it.
Yeah.
Because Dave weaves in Aaron Clarey's nonfiction book, Curse of the High IQ. And by using this fictional story, it allows us to really kind of feel and experience the emotional and social realities of what Clarey's describing.
Yeah, so let's jump into the fictional story and kind of unpack it a little bit.
Yeah.
So we're introduced to this character, Elliot, who lives in this society called Bellcurvia. And even as a kid, Elliot is different, right? He's constantly asking why, way more than anyone else, which annoys his teachers, and his friends find him too intense.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening can probably relate to that experience of feeling like you're different or maybe a little out of sync with your peers. What's interesting, though, is that Dave's isn't just telling like a coming-of-age story. He's using Elliot's experiences to show us how a high intelligence can actually lead to isolation.
And this isolation, it doesn't stop in childhood. As Elliot grows up, even though he's clearly brilliant, he struggles in the workplace. There's this one scene where Elliot proposes a solution that could literally save his company tons of money, but his bosses just dismiss it because they say it'll disrupt the existing hierarchy.
Yeah, and that scene really perfectly illustrates one of Clarey's key points, which is that sometimes high IQ individuals struggle economically. It's not because they lack ability, but because there's a mismatch between their skills and what the system is actually set up to reward.
And could this be why we see, so many highly intelligent people end up kind of disillusioned with those traditional career paths and move towards entrepreneurship or freelancing where they have more autonomy?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's definitely a pattern that Clarey observed.
Yeah.
High IQ individuals, they crave that freedom to pursue their own ideas and create something new. And those traditional work structures, they can just feel really stifling.
So Elliot's story, even though it is fictional, is giving us some really real insights, I think, into some of the potential downsides of having a high IQ.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole other layer to the book with the Society of Bellcurvia, and this place is wild.
Oh, yeah. Bellcurvia, it's like this metaphor for all of the forces in the world, in our world, I should say, that can sometimes stifle innovation and independent thinking.
Right.
Days actually creates this ruling class, and it's called the Council of Mediocrities. And they're led by the wonderfully named Empress Queen Mother Absinthia. Their whole shtick is just maintaining the status quo, even if it means like squashing any new ideas.
Wow. Daves doesn't hold back, does he? He literally calls them the Council of Mediocrities.
Oh, not at all. But that's what makes it so effective. He's using satire to highlight this really real phenomenon, which is that there's a tendency for people in power to resist change, even if that change would actually be beneficial.
So we have Elliot struggling to fit in, and then we have this whole society that's literally designed to enforce conformity. Do you think Daves is being overly pessimistic here? Is the world really that hostile to high intelligence?
I wouldn't say hostile, but I do think there is a truth to the idea that those who think differently, those who see the world, from a unique perspective, often feel like outsiders.
Yeah.
And this actually brings us to one of Clarey's other key concepts, which is the curse of awareness.
The curse of awareness. Okay, that sounds intriguing. What exactly is that?
Well, Clarey argues that high IQ individuals are more attuned to the world's flaws and its inefficiencies.
Yeah.
They see the cracks in the system, the inconsistencies, the ways things could be better.
Yeah.
But this awareness, while valuable, can also be a source of frustration and sometimes even despair.
Oh, wow. So it's like they're cursed with seeing too much, like with understanding all these complexities of the world in a way that most people just don't.
Exactly. And this can lead to this sense of alienation. Imagine being surrounded by people who seem oblivious to these problems that you see so clearly.
Yeah.
It can be really isolating.
So how does Elliot deal with this curse of awareness in Bellcurvia? Does he try to change the system, or does he just give up and conform?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. There's this powerful scene in the book where a group of engineers, and they clearly represent like the innovative thinkers in this world.
Okay.
They build this incredible bridge to connect this divided city.
Yeah. Sounds like progress. I bet the Council of Mediocrities love that.
Not so much. In a shocking twist, the bridge gets sabotaged.
Oh, wow.
And guess who is behind it?
Oh, I'm afraid to ask, but is it the Empress and her council?
Bingo.
Wow.
They see this bridge as a threat to their control, so they destroy it even though it would have benefited everyone.
That's dark. So what does this tell us about how societies sometimes treat their most brilliant minds?
I think it speaks to this fear of change, this resistance to new ideas, especially when those ideas are coming from people who are seen as different or challenging to the existing power structure.
And this makes me think back to what Clary was saying about high IQ individuals often facing those economic disadvantages.
Yeah.
It's like the system isn't designed to reward the people offering genuine solutions. It's rewarding the people who are just playing by the rules, even if those rules are outdated or inefficient.
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradox. We celebrate geniuses in theory, but then in practice, we often create structures that just stifle their potential.
So we've established that Eliot's life in Bellcurvia is not exactly a walk in the park.
Definitely not.
But surely there's got to be a way to navigate this curse, right? Clary wouldn't just leave us with a bunch of, depressing insights.
He doesn't. Both Clary and Daves offer some strategies for dealing with the challenges of high intelligence. And that's what we'll delve into next.
Okay.
No speaker.
Okay, so where do we go from here? If this world of Bellcurvia is like a reflection of our own reality, how can those of us who identify with Eliot with this feeling of being a discarded intellect, how can we actually thrive?
Well, the good news is both Clary and Daves, they offer some really practical advice. And one of the biggest things Clary recommends is finding your niche, finding your tribe, like a group of people who understand you and who appreciate that unique perspective that you bring.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you're constantly surrounded by people who don't get you, it's no wonder you'd start feeling like there's something wrong with you.
Right. And Clary argues that finding your tribe is especially important for high IQ individuals because they often just think and process information differently. And this can make it really hard to connect with people who are operating on a different intellectual wavelength.
Okay, so how do you actually go about finding your tribe? It's not like there's a high IQ individuals meetup group, on every street corner.
True, although those probably exist somewhere online. But Clary suggests, exploring different communities and groups, both online and offline, that align with your interests and your values.
Okay.
It could be anything from a book club to a professional organization to even like a group of online gamers. The key is to find people who challenge you intellectually and who you can have those like really meaningful conversations with.
And this is something that Daves actually echoes through Eliot's journey.
Yeah.
Remember how isolated Eliot feels for most of his life? Well, there's a turning point in the story where he stumbles upon this group of artists and intellectuals who are living off the grid.
Right.
They've kind of created their own little community outside the confines of Bellcurvian society.
It's such a powerful scene because it's like Eliot finally finds a place where he can truly be himself, where his intelligence is valued and celebrated instead of being seen as a threat.
Yeah, it's almost like Daves is suggesting that sometimes the best way to thrive is to create your own world. Create your own system where the rules are different and where you can be surrounded by people who just get you.
I think that's a valid interpretation for sure.
Yeah.
And it ties into another one of Clary's key points, which is the importance of developing emotional intelligence.
Oh, right, EQ. I've heard that's just as important as IQ, if not more so. But how does this relate to finding your tribe or creating your own world?
Well, Clary argues that even if you're surrounded by like-minded people, you still need to be able to communicate effectively and build strong relationships.
Yeah.
And that requires emotional intelligence.
So it's not enough to just be smart. You also need to be able to connect with people on an emotional level.
Exactly. And this is something that Eliot learns the hard way in the book. Early on, he really struggles to form any kind of lasting relationships because he comes across as arrogant and condescending.
Like he's so focused on being right that he forgets to be kind.
Exactly. And it's only when he starts to develop his emotional intelligence, his ability to empathize with others and understand their perspectives, that he's able to really build genuine connections.
That's such an important point. I think sometimes we assume that intelligent people are automatically good at social interaction, but that's not always the case.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence is a skill, and like any skill, it can be learned and developed.
So do Clary and Daves offer any tips on how to actually improve our EQ?
They do. Clary suggests things like practicing active listening, paying attention to nonverbal cues, and being more mindful of how our words and actions affect others.
Okay, those are great tips. I think we could all benefit from working on those skills, regardless of our IQ.
Definitely. Emotional intelligence is essential for success in all areas of life, from personal relationships to professional endeavors.
So we've talked about finding your tribe and developing emotional intelligence. Are there any other strategies that Clary and Dave suggest for navigating this curse of high IQ?
One that really stood out to me was the idea of adjusting expectations.
Okay.
Clary points out that high intelligence doesn't guarantee happiness or wealth or even social acceptance. And sometimes high IQ individuals can set these really unrealistic expectations for themselves,
Right.
which can lead to a lot of disappointment and frustration.
Yeah, just because you're smart doesn't mean that life is going to be easy.
Right. And Clary emphasizes the importance of finding fulfillment in the process of learning and growing rather than focusing solely on those external achievements or validation.
So it's more about embracing the journey rather than obsessing over the destination.
Exactly. And I think this kind of ties back to the idea of creating your own world, your own definition of success.
Yeah.
If you're constantly measuring yourself against societal expectations, you're likely to fall short.
Mm-hmm.
But if you define success on your own terms, then you're free to pursue your passions and create a life that really aligns with your values.
I love that. It's so empowering. And it makes me think of something that Dave's touches on in the book. This idea that history is often written by those who were initially rejected by the mainstream.
Oh, absolutely. He uses this analogy of seeds that are scattered by the wind.
Okay.
And some of those seeds, they land on fertile ground and they flourish,
Mm-hmm.
while others land on barren ground and they just kind of wither away.
Wait, what does that have to do with history?
Well, Daves argues that the seeds represent ideas and innovations,
Okay.
and the ground represents society.
I see.
So sometimes society is receptive to new ideas, and those ideas, they take root and they spread.
Yeah.
But other times, society rejects those ideas, and they're essentially discarded.
So the seeds that land on barren ground, those are like the discarded intellects.
Exactly. But here's the twist. Even though those seeds may not flourish immediately, they still have the potential to take root later on.
Oh, okay.
Maybe the wind carries them to a different patch of ground, or maybe the ground itself changes over time and becomes more fertile.
That's a really hopeful way of looking at it. So even if you feel like your ideas are being rejected now, it doesn't mean they won't find a receptive audience in the future.
Right. And Daves points out that many of the most influential figures in history were initially considered outcasts or heretics. Think about Galileo, Copernicus, Darwin.
Right.
They all challenged the prevailing beliefs of their time and were met with a lot of resistance.
But eventually their ideas did change the world.
Exactly. And that's why Daves encourages readers to just keep planting those seeds, to keep sharing their ideas, even if they don't see immediate results.
It's like that saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
I love that analogy, and I think it applies perfectly to this whole idea of embracing the curse of high IQ. Even if you feel like you're not being heard or appreciated right now, keep cultivating your unique talents and sharing your insights with the world. You never know what kind of impact you might have.
This is making me think about the concept of a polymathic renaissance that you mentioned earlier. Can you remind me what that's all about?
Of course. The polymathic renaissance refers to this potential shift in society where we move away from specialization
Okay.
and towards a more holistic, interdisciplinary approach to problem solving.
So instead of having experts in very narrow fields, we have more people who are skilled in a variety of areas and who can connect the dots between different disciplines.
Exactly. And this is where I think high IQ individuals have a huge role to play, because they often have this natural curiosity and a knack for seeing patterns and connections that other people miss.
So they're like the ultimate dot connectors.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and interconnected, that skill is more valuable than ever.
So we've got finding our tribe, developing emotional intelligence, adjusting expectations, and embracing this potential polymathic renaissance. Those are some pretty solid strategies for navigating the curse of high IQ. Is there anything else Clary and Dave's offer in terms of advice?
Well, there's one more point I wanted to touch on, and it's a bit more philosophical,
Okay.
but I think it's really important.
Intrigued. Tell me more.
Both Clary and Daves emphasize the importance of recognizing your own intellectual and spiritual autonomy.
Yeah.
They argue that high IQ individuals can be prone to nihilism,
Yeah.
to this feeling that nothing really matters because
Yeah.
they see through the illusions that kind of comfort most people.
It's like that curse of awareness we talked about can lead to a whole existential crisis.
Exactly. But Clary and Days, they offer a way out of that nihilistic trap. They argue for the importance of finding meaning outside those traditional structures,
Okay.
whether that's through personal creativity or building independent communities or contributing to projects that align with your values.
Yeah. So it's not just about surviving the curse, it's about thriving in spite of it.
Right.
It's about using your unique abilities to create something better, both for yourself and for the world.
And that's where I think this whole discussion about the polymathic renaissance intersects with the spiritual and existential aspects of high IQ.
Yeah.
If you feel like an outsider, if you feel like the world doesn't get you, maybe it's because you're meant to build a new world, a world that resonates with your vision, your values, your understanding of how things could be.
You just touched on something that really struck me in both Clary and Dave's work, this idea of finding meaning outside those traditional systems. It's like they're both acknowledging this tension between high IQ individuals and the default world, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, they like to really highlight that tension.
Yeah.
And Dave's especially gets pretty pointed with it.
Yeah.
He uses this metaphor of a vampire world,
Okay.
a system that just drains our energy and creativity without offering much in return.
Wow.
He even suggests that those with high IQs need to starve the vampire by stepping outside of its influence.
So that sounds intense, but I can see how it connects to what we were talking about earlier with, Elliot finding his community outside Bellcurvia and creating something new.
Right. It's like he's saying, look, if you're constantly feeling drained by the expectations and the limitations of the existing system, maybe the answer isn't to just try harder to fit in.
Right.
Maybe it's to create something new, something that nourishes you instead of depleting you.
And it's not just about escaping a system that doesn't get you right. It's also about using your unique abilities to build something better, something that's aligned with your values.
Exactly. Clary talks about this too, this idea that high IQ individuals have a responsibility to use their gifts to make a positive impact on the world. And he suggests that this might look different for everyone. For some, it might mean pursuing a career in research or innovation, while for others, it might mean starting a business or creating art or even just being a more engaged citizen.
And that's where I think this conversation gets really exciting, because it's not just about individuals finding their own path to happiness and fulfillment. It's about the potential for collective change.
Right.
Remember that idea of a polymathic renaissance we talked about earlier? It seems like that kind of shift in society could really open up so many possibilities for people who have felt like discarded intellects.
Absolutely. If we can move away from a system that rewards specialization and conformity and embrace this more holistic, interdisciplinary approach to problem solving, I think we'll start to see the true potential of high IQ individuals come to light.
Because they're the ones who are often able to see the bigger picture, to connect the dots between different fields, to come up with those truly innovative solutions.
Exactly. And this is why Daves ends his book on such a hopeful note. Even though he paints this pretty bleak picture of Bellcurvia, he also suggests that change is possible, that the vampire world isn't invincible.
He even hints at the possibility of a polymathic revolution where those who have been marginalized by the system rise up and create something new, something better.
Yes. And he argues that this revolution isn't about violence or overthrowing the existing order. It's about creating alternative systems, alternative communities, alternative ways of being that are more aligned with human potential.
It's like this quiet rebellion, a refusal to play by the rules of a game that's rigged against you.
Exactly. And I think that's the most empowering message we can take away from this whole deep dive. If you've ever felt like you're too smart for your own good, like the world doesn't understand, you remember that you're not alone. There are other people out there who share your experience, who see the world the way you do.
And maybe you're not broken, you're just ahead of your time. Maybe you're part of this polymathic renaissance, this wave of brilliant minds who are building a new world, a world that values intelligence and creativity and the courage to be different.
So if you're listening to this and you resonate with this idea of being a discarded intellect, take heart. Embrace your unique gifts. Find your tribe. And never stop planting those seeds. Because the future belongs to those who dare to create it.
That is such a powerful message to end on. This has been a truly insightful deep dive. I hope you, our listener, found it valuable and thought-provoking. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a fascinating topic, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned.